I found the photograph while cleaning out the old wing of the military archives in Halifax. I wasn't supposed to be there after hours, but the pipes leaked and the janitorial staff was short that week, so I volunteered. Most of the rooms were nothing but dust, mold, and yellowed paper, the kind of rot that smells like iron. But in the basement, behind a row of filing cabinets stamped Royal Canadian Expeditionary Force, I found a narrow wooden crate stamped simply 1910. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, curled and silvered at the edges, still smelling faintly of developer fluid. One caught my eye immediately. It showed 13 men in uniform, posing on a grassy field with barracks behind them. Their faces were young, clean-shaven, full of that pre-war confidence you only see in early photographs, when death was still something abstract. 12 men smiled faintly at the camera. The 13th didn't. He sat in the middle of the front row, wearing a uniform darker than the others, his cap pulled low. His face was stiff, expression unreadable. His skin, even in the faded sepia tone, looked pallid, flat in a way that light doesn't touch. The others leaned subtly away from him, though you wouldn't notice unless you looked closely. It wasn't staged the same as the rest. The composition had tension, like they didn't want him there. Stamped on the back, Camp Drummond, Ontario, 1910, Medical Corps Unit. At first, I assumed it was just an old training photo, but when I looked again, something small twisted in my gut. The shadows were wrong. Every man's shadow fell to the right, except his. His fell forward, across his boots, as though the light source had changed only for him. I laughed it off, told myself it was a photographic glitch. The early silver nitrate process was unpredictable. Exposure times varied. But when I turned the photo toward the light, something strange happened. His image darkened. The others stayed the same, but the man in the center seemed to deepen in tone, as though reacting to the brightness. I slipped the photo into my pocket. I wish I hadn't. That night, I brought it home and scanned it. The image loaded slowly, grain by grain, line by line, until the full group appeared on my screen. As the pixels sharpened, I saw more detail than the print had revealed. The folds in their jackets, the insignia pins, even faint dirt stains on their boots. But there was something on the darker uniform sleeve I hadn't noticed before. A faint white band with a red cross. Medical Corps, yes, but the patch was inverted, the red cross upside down. I zoomed in further. His face broke apart into static, pixels bleeding outward as though resisting definition. When I tried to print it, the printer jammed. When it finally spat the paper out, the photo had changed. The man's eyes were open now. The next morning, I called a colleague at the Nova Scotia Historical Society, a soft-spoken archivist named Andrew. He agreed to meet that afternoon. When I showed him the print, he frowned. Camp Drummond, he said. That would have been one of the early medical training sites before the Great War. But 1910? That's odd. There shouldn't be any formal medical detachments listed before 1914. He examined the image with a magnifying glass. "Do you see this man here?" he asked, pointing to the pale one. "His uniform doesn't match. That's not the 1910 cut. It's closer to 1890. He flipped the photo over. Someone had written a name in faint pencil. Private Merrick, deceased. Andrew looked up. Deceased? So this was posthumous? I shrugged. Could be. Maybe they took it after his funeral. He nodded slowly, though his expression didn't relax. But that would make him the only corpse ever photographed in a military unit portrait. They stopped doing that in the 1860s. We both laughed nervously, as if to puncture the air that had gone suddenly dense. That night, the dreams began. I was standing in an open field under a colorless sky. The same 13 men were there, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. They were assembling for the photograph again, taking their positions. One of them turned toward me, the pale man, Merrick. His mouth opened slowly, the movement stiff like a broken hinge. A voice scraped out, low and dry. "We were never meant to leave." I woke drenched in sweat. The photo lay on my nightstand, though I'd left it in my desk drawer at work. In the grey dawn light, the ink on the back had changed. Where it had once said Camp Drummond, Ontario, 1910, there was now an additional line, written in faint graphite, "Retaken after the burial." I couldn't shake it. By noon I was back at the archives. I looked up Camp Drummond in the military registry. Nothing. Not a single reference. But in an old ledger labelled Dominion Army Medical Services, 1908 to 1911, I found a note about an unrecorded training detachment relocated after a sanitation incident. The location? Drummond Township. The casualty report listed one death, Private John Merrick, cause, exposure. No date of burial, no next of kin. When I showed Andrew, he frowned again. Exposure could mean anything, he said. Fever, frostbite, gas leak. He hesitated. Or it could mean he was already dead when they found him. I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "There's an old superstition in the early Corps. Men wouldn't bury someone until the photograph was taken. It was ritual, in a way. Proof they existed, proof they'd been one of them. They said if a soldier died far from home, his image had to return before his soul could." He pushed the photo back toward me. "Maybe they took it twice." That night, I stayed in the records building after everyone had gone. I wanted to see if there were other photos from the same session. I found one. It showed the same group, same field, same men, but the composition was slightly off. They were smiling more, relaxed, all except Merrick. In this version, his eyes were closed, head tilted slightly downward as if in prayer. On the back, in the same handwriting, was written, "First attempt. Light failed." I placed the two side by side. In the first, his eyes were closed. In the second, open. Between the exposures, something had changed, or woken. Around midnight, I heard footsteps echoing through the stacks. I called out, assuming Andrew had come back. No answer. Then a voice, distant, flat, the kind that comes from an empty room. Exposure successful. The lights flickered. For a moment, every photograph on the nearby shelves seemed to shift, the faces turning subtly toward me, mouths softening into almost smiles. When the power stabilized, they were still. But the air smelled of iron again, that same copper tang of darkroom chemicals. And on the table, the photograph had moved an inch closer to me. The next morning, the photo still smelled faintly of chemicals, like it had just been developed. I locked it in a steel drawer and signed it out of circulation so no one else could touch it. Archivists are careful about contamination, finger oils, light exposure. But this was different. I didn't want the air touching it. Andrew called around noon. He'd gone home the previous night, uneasy, and had spent hours combing the National Registry. "There's something wrong with your Merrick," he said. "His service number doesn't exist. Every man in that detachment is listed except him. The number belongs to someone who died in South Africa in 1899. He paused. "The Boer War." "Maybe the same man re-enlisted," I said. "Impossible. He'd be 40 by 1910, and this fellow looks barely 25. A moment of silence crackled through the line. "You sure that photo says 1910? "Yes." "Then whoever he is," Andrew murmured, "he's not from their time." The phrase stuck in my head. Not from their time. That evening, I reopened the drawer. The photograph had changed again. Now Merrick's hand rested on the shoulder of the soldier beside him. It hadn't before. I was certain of it. The touch looked awkward, almost possessive. The man he touched, seated to his right, had his jaw clenched, lips drawn tight as if suppressing a shiver. I decided to document everything. I set up my phone to record the image overnight, camera trained on the print, under steady light. If there was some optical reaction, temperature, humidity, I'd catch it. At 3 a.m., the phone woke me with a soft chime. Motion detected. I opened the feed. The men in the photograph were moving, not fluidly, like a film reel skipping frames, heads twitching, shoulders adjusting. And in the center, Merrick's eyes glowed faintly white, the emulsion around them blooming like frost. He looked directly at the lens. Then the video cut to static. I didn't sleep again. The next day, I visited the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa. Their microfilm archives held early expedition logs. I scrolled through reel after reel until I found a brief article clipped from the Drummond Gazette, August 1910. Training Camp Tragedy. A detachment of medical trainees suffered exposure during field exercises near Lake Lanark. One fatality, identified as Private John Merrick. Body recovered 2 days later under unusual circumstances. Witnesses report the corpse in remarkable condition despite time in the elements. Unit photo taken for memorial record. Another paragraph had been scratched out by hand. I pressed the microfilm forward, squinting. Someone had penciled in the margin. He wouldn't stay buried. When I returned to Halifax, Andrew's desk was empty. A note sat on top of a stack of folders. 3 words in his handwriting. Don't look again. But of course I did. I printed another copy of the scan and held it beside the original. Side by side, the differences were undeniable. Merrick's face was more distinct now, sharper than any photograph that age should allow. The others looked fainter, as though the emulsion were leaching from them into him. The grass behind the group had withered to grey. I took the photo to the restoration lab and ran an ultraviolet scan. Hidden inscriptions bloomed along the border, notations invisible in daylight, exposure number 2, subject responsive, and beneath it, etched in the gelatin itself, awaiting replacement. The power went out at dusk. The building groaned as if settling deeper into its foundation. In the darkness, I heard soft footsteps in the corridor. I called out for security. No answer. When I shone my flashlight, the beam caught wet boot prints leading from the archive door straight to my office. Each step pressed a faint outline of the Red Cross armband. At the threshold, something stood, a man in an outdated uniform, face pale as undeveloped film. He raised his head, and for the first time I heard a sound, breathing that wasn't mine. "You took it," he said. His voice rasped like paper dragged across stone. "They made me stay." "I don't understand," I whispered. He stepped closer. The smell of soil and rot thickened the air. I was meant to go home. They wouldn't let me until the picture was perfect. His eyes, empty sockets lit from within by a dull phosphorescence, focused on me. "Now you've spoiled it." I stumbled backward, hitting the desk. The flashlight rolled away, spinning light across the walls. When it steadied, he was gone. Only the photo remained, lying face down. On its back, fresh writing had appeared in soot-grey strokes. First attempt, light failed. I stopped going home. I slept on the archive cot, terrified of taking the thing beyond the building. I sealed the photograph in a lead box, wrapped it in cloth, and stored it inside the dehumidified vault. But every morning it was back on my desk. By the 3rd day, something else began happening. When I caught my reflection in the glass doors, there were 13 men behind me, their outlines faint and sepia-toned, lined up just as in the picture. And in the center, Merrick's figure grew clearer, as if stepping forward from the silver emulsion of memory. I dug deeper into personnel rosters, desperate for reason. In a forgotten register from 1911, I found a court of inquiry transcript. Question: Why was Private Merrick's body exhumed 3 times? Answer, Captain Wallace. Because the coffin kept surfacing after burial. We thought gas buildup. We burned it. Next morning, body intact again in the tent. Question. And after the photograph? Answer. No further disturbance. Men requested reassignment. Camp Drummond closed within a week. At the bottom, the officer had added a note in pencil. The camera kept fogging until we let him sit upright. That night, the dreams changed. No longer fields or soldiers, just the red glow of a darkroom. Chemical trays shimmered. From the developer bath, a shape rose. My own face, blurred, floating above a uniform I didn't recognize. Someone whispered behind me, exposure complete. I woke to find the photograph clutched in my hands, the edges wet, as though fresh from solution. I left Halifax before dawn, the photograph sealed in an envelope I couldn't stop touching. The highway unfurled through a pale fog, the kind that makes everything look like a half-developed negative. Camp Drummond lay 5 hours west, nothing but woods, lakes, and the ghosts of towns that never made it past the war. According to the archives, the original site sat near Lake Lanark, long since abandoned and absorbed by forest. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Maybe proof that it was just a story, a coincidence, a trick of light. But some part of me knew I was going there to finish what had started. By noon, I reached the end of the paved road. Beyond that, a dirt trail vanished into trees. I parked, pocketed the envelope, and walked. The air smelled of pine and something older, wet stone, iron, decay. After a mile, I came upon a clearing, its grass brittle and yellow, ringed by collapsed wooden huts. In the center stood a rusted flagpole leaning at a fatal angle, and beside it, barely visible under the weeds, a rectangle of ground darker than the rest. I knew before I stepped closer that it was a grave. There was no marker, no name, just the faint outline of something once burned there, the ghost of a cross scorched into the soil. The air above it shimmered faintly, as if heated by invisible light. I knelt and opened the envelope. The photograph slid out easily, lighter than I remembered. The men stared up at me through the sepia haze, all except Merrick, whose eyes seemed fixed on something just above my shoulder. "I'm not one of you," I whispered, but the words didn't sound convincing. Not even to me. The wind shifted. The trees around the clearing creaked as though exhaling after a long silence. Then, faintly, the sound of footsteps, boots on dirt, coming from behind. I turned. They were there, all 12 of them. The same faces, the same uniforms, walking out of the trees in perfect formation. Their movements were jerky, like frames missing from a reel. Their eyes shone faintly, the dull silver of undeveloped film. They stopped a few feet from me, forming a semicircle. Merrick stood in the center. "You brought it back," he said. His voice was soft, almost kind, but the sound of it made my teeth ache. "It needed to be here," I managed. He nodded. "It always does." The others began to spread out, taking their positions as though preparing for a photograph. Merrick turned toward me, raising a hand. "We took it wrong before," he said. "Light failed, but you've brought new exposure." My pulse hammered. "What happens now?" "Correction." He stepped closer. His hand, when it touched my shoulder, was ice cold, weightless. I tried to pull away, but the air itself seemed to harden. My vision swam, the clearing fading to grayscale, the color draining from the world, until everything looked like old film stock. "Breathe," he said, and the word echoed like a command in a tunnel. The world stuttered. When it came back into focus, I was standing among them. The camera was already there, an old wooden box on a tripod, brass lens gleaming faintly in the ashen light. A figure stood behind it, a man I didn't recognize, wearing a uniform older than the rest. His face was half obscured by shadow, but his hands were steady as he adjusted the focus. "Hold still," he said. "Don't blink." The men around me froze. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. The air felt viscous, thick with chemical fumes. I tried to speak, to step forward, but my body didn't obey. Merrick turned his head slightly toward me. "Smile," he said. The flash went off. White light swallowed everything. When my sight returned, I was alone again. The clearing was empty. No soldiers, no camera, no footprints in the soil. Only the photograph lay on the ground at my feet. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was different now. There were still 13 men, but one of them was me. Front row, second from the right. My face calm, eyes open, hand resting on Merrick's shoulder. The edges of the photo were wet, the emulsion soft, as though it hadn't finished developing. My fingers came away stained grey. I stumbled back toward the car, the world spinning around me. When I reached the road, the sun had already set, though I could have sworn I'd only been gone an hour. I drove without headlights, guided by instinct more than vision. Every few minutes I glanced at the passenger seat where the photograph rested. The faces seemed to shift in the dim light, eyes glancing sideways, mouths twitching toward smiles. By the time I reached Halifax, the streets were empty. My watch said 11:32 p.m., but the city looked deserted, the windows of every building dark. I parked in front of the archives and went inside. The power was out again. My footsteps echoed through the hall like another person walking just behind me. When I reached my office, the desk lamp flickered once and came alive. The photograph waited there, upright, propped against a stack of ledgers. I hadn't brought it in. And this time, it wasn't a print. It was a glass plate negative, still damp, faintly glowing from within. I lifted it to the light. The image was perfect, crisp, balanced, fully exposed. 13 men in uniform, 13 pairs of eyes staring straight ahead. And behind them, faint but visible, a 14th figure, taller, its face obscured, standing exactly where the camera should have been. My reflection flickered in the glass for a second, then disappeared. Only the men remained. I don't remember leaving the building. I remember light, brief flashes like camera bulbs, everywhere I turned. When I woke again, it was daylight, and I was lying on the floor of the records room, surrounded by photographs. Not just one, but dozens, hundreds, each a variation of the same image. In some, the uniforms were older, in others, newer. But the formation was identical. 13 soldiers, one camera, one unseen photographer. Sometimes the field was green, sometimes snow-covered, sometimes barren. The only constant was the center figure, always Merrick, always looking directly at whoever held the image. The final photograph, lying at the top of the pile, showed me again. But this time, I wasn't among the seated men. I was the one behind the camera. Beneath it, handwritten in wet ink, "Exposure complete." I quit the archives that day, burned what I could, locked the rest. But you can't really destroy a photograph. Every copy leaves residue, on paper, on glass, on the eye. The brain itself holds its own negative. I see them even now, in reflections, in the flash of passing cars, in the silver glare of puddles after rain. Sometimes, late at night, my phone vibrates with no caller ID. When I answer, there's no voice, just a faint clicking, like a camera winding. And in the silence between each click, a whisper. Hold still. I've stopped fighting it. The photograph isn't history. It's hunger. It needs new light, new faces, new exposure. It keeps perfecting itself through whoever looks too long. And one day, when some archivist years from now finds an unmarked crate buried under dust and opens it to see 13 men in a 1910 military photo, he'll notice something odd. The uniforms will look authentic, the field ordinary. But one of the men won't quite belong. He'll be wearing a modern jacket, a small silver watch, eyes open too wide. He'll be me, smiling faintly, waiting for the flash.